65, 6209, 65.
George can do these seemingly impossible feats of calendar calculation.
What day's your birthday?
September 17, 92.
That's on a Thursday. I get these things in my head, and then sometimes it comes out in my drawing. You know, I'm just a person that can get obsessed about certain things. I was labeled sort of schizoid personality. So I ended up on the streets. I'm sort of in tune with these things that are inside everybody, but they're in their subconscious. I'm able to kind of connect with numbers in that way. 2, 52, 86, 86, then 1, 4, 5, 1, 4, 4, 5. There's 86,400 seconds in a day. I'm considered to be one of the best in calendar calculation, seeing dates. I know thousands of years of calendars. 6209, 6574, 6,574 days old on your birthday.
And he counted the number of days you were. That's crazy.
There's different kinds of savants. I'm considered a high-functioning calendar savant.
Savant syndrome is a rare condition that scientists can't quite explain. To possess genius in one highly specialized area, while also having an underlying mental disability. George's genius is also his curse.
I get overstimulated by things. I get overwhelmed.
He is afflicted by numbers. He can't turn them off.
My impression is that he is continually counting, even if he said, I want to stop that for a while and do something else, that you really can't.
107.374.
This is much a force as it is a gift.
September 28th is a Tuesday this year. It's also a Tuesday I see in 1993.
He sees a license plate with a number on it and will rapidly associate these numbers.
There's a license plate, 3778. And that one is Sunday on September 13th, 3778.
To calculate the day of the week for a particular date, you must first find the total number of days between now and then. Divide by 7. If the remainder is 0, it will be the same weekday as today. If the remainder is 1, it will be 1 weekday later. Even with a calculator, it takes time. Yet George does this math instinctively.
What day's your birthday?
September 17, 92.
Yeah, that's on a Thursday, 1992, yeah.
Anybody who sits in front of a savant and watches them do these calculations just effortlessly and immediately has to be amazed.
I see it. I can see it. I'm not using a method or nothing. I can just see it, yeah. I was born with that.
We've asked students to practice doing these really complicated tasks. And no matter how hard we practice, none of us could ever come up to the level of performance that these savants could do.
Among savants, calendar calculating is the third most common skill, behind musical and artistic ability. No one knows what causes this peculiar obsession.
When I was a child, I remember being transfixed in front of my grandmother's calendar. It just stuck with me, the dates, the numbers. I lined up my toys, and that's the way the calendars are kind of in my head. They're kind of in a row, and I move that line of numbers around, shift them back and forth, and they fall into a certain place, and it feels comfortable. At school, the teachers would get on me, and they'd say, what are you doing? You're not doing your work and stuff. I had some odd behaviors. I'd like stand on my toes and walk. I couldn't properly dress myself or tie my shoes up until I was like 7 or 8 years old, and yet I was ahead of the other kids in certain areas. I had a lot of drawing abilities. 8, 9 years old, I could draw quite realistic in great detail from memory. It was just something that I could do. I had abilities and I had difficulties. And the teachers, I think, had difficulty in trying to put those two together at that time. They first labeled me antisocial. As I got older, I was having difficulty living on my own. I was labeled at one point sort of schizoid personality. I wasn't able to really organize and structure my life by myself. When I'm alone, I tend to get into these certain patterns of like where I'll get real obsessed about a certain subject. And I kind of got lapsed into doing that. So I ended up on the street. I'll get kind of overwhelmed sometimes by different noises and different sounds. I ended up actually living in a homeless shelter, and I was going to libraries and reading and drawing.
George Widener has a mysterious talent and obsession for calendars.
16, 23, 30. June 6, 30. Calendar dates have rhythm, they have motion, they reflect, they balance each other. June 7th in 1803 is a Tuesday, and June 7th, the year 3081 is a Tuesday.
His memory for dates and numbers is remarkable, and he has a recall of history, and he's able to put that all together.
The Yellow Pages, the first phone book came out February 1878. New Haven, Connecticut. There were only 50 names.
Psychologists have a name for George's combination of obsessive behaviors.
It wasn't until my late 20s that a counselor said, "Oh, George, have you ever heard of Asperger Syndrome?" And I said, "No, I've never heard of that."
Asperger Syndrome is an autism spectrum disorder. It's marked by difficulties in social interaction, with repetitive behaviors such as rocking back and forth, and restricted interests, calendars, or the Titanic, for example.
The Titanic was 882 feet, 8 inches long, and 97.5 feet wide. It had a 100-ton rudder, 16 major compartments, and 9 decks. It's like a very high-functioning person with autism. It's what I am. Yes.
The most famous savant of all, Kim Peek, inspired the movie Rain Man and motivated George to turn his life around.
Big man, George.
When I met Kim Peek, it was an amazing experience for me. We were in the library and a lady told us her birthday, and I told her day of week real quick before Kim could, and Kim wasn't used to somebody being faster than that, I think. Kim had, I believe, 17 areas in which he had expert knowledge. Of course, that's related to his ability to remember everything that he read.
Kim Peek memorized over 12,000 books before his death in 2009. Yet his overall IQ scored below average, and his father had to dress him his entire life.
When I met Kim Peek, it had an effect on me and stuff. Kim was the ultimate example of someone who could do numerical facts, but he wasn't able to live an independent life. And I realized that there's a trade-off. I decided that I didn't want to be that type of person. I wanted to interact with people and have a social life more. To my 30s, I think, I wasn't a very social person. I was a person who did artwork totally on my own. That's what's called an outsider artist, where you make your art and you don't care if anybody sees it or not, and you're just doing your own thing, and you have little or no knowledge of the art world. And at one time, that's what I was. I began to have some interaction with people who would see my drawings, People would walk by me simply in like the library, and they'd stop and they said, "Oh, you should show with a gallery." And I said, "What exactly is that? Well, how you do that or whatever?" This is something different.
Whoa! What did you do?
It's different for me. It's just like a dream kind of drawing.
That is so cool.
I have a group of people who know my story, where I struggled a bit, who respect me for that and like my artwork. Gradually, you start to have some interaction with galleries, and I'm going to have my first solo show.
George Widener was a sometimes homeless loner with Asperger Syndrome before his artwork was discovered by galleries in London and New York.
I get these memories, I get these things in my head, and then sometimes it comes out in my drawing.
Some savants have a single skill, like music or art. But interestingly, George has several skills, and so he's able to put the combination of those skills into art with numbers and history and calendar calculating.
George's compositions are densely detailed, complex, alternative realities made up of numbers, letters, and history.
It seems like you see beauty in numbers.
Yeah.
But you've made this really beautiful for the rest of us.
George works with numbers in a rather amazing way.
The numbers that are common to these are 2, 8, 9, because 5's in everything.
We see in George's work part of ourselves, that compulsive, obsessive part that's sort of buried in all of us, but he may have more of it than we have.
When it's experienced alone, it can be very painful, and it can also destroy people. It means either make art or pretty much die.
It took me time, but I learned the artwork is an outlet for me to socialize and interact with people.
I'm going through 30 days, roughly 30 days a month of doubles. I do that sometimes. I count through a consecutive month and stuff. And see,
I think the sort of the merging of calendar calculating skills with art skills and history retrieval, I think, is not surprising in the sense that those are three savant skills. Those tend to be right hemisphere skills that can be linked together.
Our brains are divided into two halves. In general, the left brain handles logic, symbolism, intellectual concepts, and sequential reasoning. But scientists believe that savants tend toward right brain thinking, typically more immediate, concrete, and instinctive. George's instinctive comprehension of numbers, his amazing memory, and his artistic ability are all thought to be right brain activities. But why would George's right brain be so much more powerful than normal?
Of course, his calendar calculation talent is greater than any of ours, but he engages a network that is available to all of us.
Something in George's neural networks is unique, but what?
There are very few savants that are high-functioning enough to actually participate in brain mapping studies.
128, 256, 512, 1020. I've been a little bit different at times in my life. 8,192, 16,003. So it was kind of important for me to see how my brain operates from a scientific point of view. $536, $131,072, $262,144, $520.
George Widener is an autistic artist with unusual math skills.
My birthday is April 13th, 1957.
1957, April 13, 1957 was a Saturday, and this year April 13th is a Tuesday.
Really? George can do these seemingly impossible feats of calendar calculations.
19,358 days old on your birthday.
Wow. Very impressive. When asked how he does this, he says that he sees it. Somehow, this is information that is available to him that's not available to the rest of us. And this makes this talent of great interest to a neuroscientist like myself.
Okay, George, can you hear me?
George is allowing researchers at Columbia University's Functional Imaging Research Center to look at the inner workings of his brain.
This first scan is going to be a 19-second scan. You don't really have to do anything except stay nice and still.
Functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, shows the flow of blood and oxygen to active parts of the brain. fMRI allows scientists to map a brain in the act of thinking.
When we do brain mapping, our objective is to isolate the neural circuitry that's involved in a specific task.
What we're going to do is show you a date, and I want you in your mind to give the day of the week. Okay.
These are George's actual thoughts in motion as he performs a calendar calculation.
Sometimes it's hard for us to imagine that from these physiological neurons comes our thoughts, our perceptions, our ideas, our ability to do calendar calculations, for example.
100 billion or so neurons with 100 trillion or more connections. Something about those connections is what makes George, George.
What we see here is a very atypical pattern of activation. You have a circuit in your brain that works from what we call the parietal lobe, and it seems to go all the way to the frontal lobe.
The parietal lobe works to integrate sensory information, spatial awareness, and numerical relationships. The frontal lobe usually handles higher functions, such as emotional self-control and social interactions.
And when you do these calendar calculations, the back of the brain is doing some computing that's connecting with the front of the lobe, and the two of those areas together are very, very active. So there's something very special about George's brain that we would like to understand.
Regions of George's brain might be working together in an abnormal way, but there is no normal way to do calendar calculations like George.
So this is going to be the first run of the sentence generation task.
For the second series of tests, Dr. Hirsch asks George to do something any of us could do easily. Use a word to make a sentence.
Remember, stay as still as you can.
So we asked George to do simple language tasks so that we could compare the activity in his brain with somebody else.
The language test reveals a startling abnormality.
What we discovered was that although George did the language task with the same proficiency as any of the rest of us, his brain did it in a very different way. What's interesting to me, George, is that you see this area right here on the left. This is the left superior temporal gyrus, a very important language region. And we would expect to see that when you're doing the language task. But we don't. You're doing the language task with an alternative neural circuit, it appears. The rest of us, when we do a language task, engage generally left-sided front-to-back circuitry. It's very different than the circuitry that George was employing. When you do the language task, what I'm seeing in your brain map is exactly the same pattern that we see for your calendar calculations.
George uses the same neural circuitry to make a simple sentence, as he does to perform incredible mental arithmetic. Perhaps because the normal language centers that most of us have are not there.
This parietal frontal circuit appears to have adopted the language function because his language system that would be considered typical either is only sparsely represented or perhaps not represented at all.
It seems George's language system didn't develop or was damaged, forcing other circuits to take up the slack. Without this brain damage, these unusual improvised circuits probably would not have formed, and George would not be a mathematical genius.
You could say something like, I have a tree in my backyard.
And so it was in looking at the very simple language tasks that gave us the most insight into George's brain.
It validates my idea that I'm not crazy. It validates that some of the labels that they gave me when I was younger were incorrect. It has been a journey in my life. I was discouraged at times, but I believed in myself, and I've been able to become an artist. And I think, history's full of artists that were a little bit offbeat. I think that the human brain is capable of tremendous things, and I think in the future this will be a very important thing because as technology advances, they will be able to understand the brain more and more and to realize the hidden potential inside of everybody's brain.